Computer recording, and we are live. So we're live here on New Maverick CEOs, new podcast, and we're inaugurating this podcast with the one, the only, Mr. Jim Greenfield, who is the star of the Decline and Fall of America podcast. He's actually the world's greatest debater, smartest guy he knows. He serves all humanity, but mostly himself. And he's been through quite a transformation over the last year.
And don't forget, the world's greatest unemployed talk host.
World's greatest unemployed talk host. So if you're looking for a talk host, Jim is available for hire. I don't think you're completely.
I'm not sure about that, but anyway.
But you've got a great track record, Jim. You know, to be fired from 7 radio networks shows that you were in demand a lot, and then you were not. So obviously you don't have attachment to the job. You just say what needs to be said, and either it makes it for you or it doesn't, and you move on. So that's one of your great traits I know about you, Jim. You know, you say what needs to be said and let it fall where it needs to fall. And even if that means you falling into the next job. So,
well, you know, I don't know if I mentioned this last time I was on, but I finally figured out after getting fired 7 times that the trick to longevity on the air is try not to piss off the owners of the station. I don't know why I hadn't figured that out sooner, but
I don't think that's your style, Jim. I think it's only when you piss off the owners of the station do you know you've done a good job.
That's how I looked at it, but they just didn't see it that way.
It's okay. There's always plenty more spots for you. So Jim, I think when did we speak? Has it been a year?
I think it was about approximately last May.
Last May. Okay. So less than a year.
10 months. 9 months, 9 months.
9 months. Yep. A lot has transpired since then. Our book came out trying to protect the world from a demise. And Jim, you were doing your thing. And what is, let's just go, you know, based on what you're expecting and how we've evolved in terms of leadership of America. And this is a podcast about the evolution of leadership, and especially we're going to talk about the evolution of leadership in this great nation of the United States of America and how that influences the world and world leadership. So Jim, what's the evolution you've seen taking place compared to what you were expecting and what's actually happened? Where do you sit with everything now?
Well, this is actually, it's your field, leadership, and I'll plug your book because you only mentioned it in passing.
You've read every word, right, Jim? Every word you got.
Yeah. So, you know, your book was a brilliant discussion of leadership and the qualities that make for great leadership, and not only that, but a practical guide how to achieve those qualities if you're not born with them. So, I give the kudos to you for that.
And my co-authors, yeah.
Yes.
Needed help.
I should have had a copy of your book to hold up, but I think you've got one right over your shoulder there. So.
Just in case, the blatant plug for it. There it is. Yeah. It's on Amazon. All right. Go get it.
Anyway, have I successfully avoided answering your question?
For the interim, yeah.
Yeah.
Now we're expecting.
You know,
Jim, just before you get started, you're not going to get fired from this podcast. So
appreciate that.
It's easy.
It's one of the advantages of not working for you is that I don't have to worry about you firing me. But if I can develop this skill of avoiding answering questions further, I could go and I can have a more successful career in politics.
Yep.
So what was your question? What's happened lately?
What's your take on the evolution of leadership here in America, and what were you expecting and what's actually the experience that you're having now?
You know, it's curious. I watched the podcast that we did last spring.
Yep.
And at that time, we spent a lot of time talking about the new totalitarian movement that has been emerging in America. Mm. And not to toot my own horn, but I did accurately predict events that have since taken place, that new totalitarian movement has now taken over the entire government of the United States. And but it's a very curious movement in that, you know, they in the November election, of course, everybody knows the Democrats won control of both houses of Congress and the White House. It's a curious movement in that, you know, you ask about leadership. I don't think I can recall a time in history when a totalitarian movement has taken control of a country without a charismatic leader. You know, in the 1930s in Germany, it was Hitler. In 1917 in Russia, it was Lenin. You know, Kim Jong-il in North Korea, and Castro in Cuba, and Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. We have a totalitarian movement that is now taking control of America and is in the process of consolidating its power. And
Jim,
there's no charismatic leader. There appears to be no leader at all. Just a bunch of kind of mini leaders. So that's kind of curious, isn't it?
Yeah, but they're multiplied. So just to make a segue here, just to go deeper on this idea of a totalitarian leadership. What is that? Define what that is, and what are the signals that you feel so confident that it is that it is actually that?
Oh, by the way, I neglected to mention one, Mao Zedong. You know, another charismatic totalitarian leader who took over and transformed China. But so you're asking me what is a charismatic totalitarian leader?
No, more about what, leadership as a movement, as you call it. What is that? And what are the implications of that? And why do you think that the signals are strong that that's what's happening? What are the signals that are
well,
this way?
You know, the leadership aspect is really more your field of expertise than mine. But in terms of observing what's happening in the United States, you know, I just, you know, when I mentioned last spring in our podcast, I told you I thought that this in the coming election, I thought if it was at all close, there would be allegations of fraud and mobs in the streets, and of course that happened. The current movement that I'm referring to, it originated on college campuses more than a generation, probably 2 generations ago, and indoctrinated a large portion of our youth, who have since spread out from college campuses, which I think is quite predictable, and gone on to take over most of the major institutions of society. They took over the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party of today is not my father's Democrat Party, and I mean that literally. My parents were lifelong dyed-in-the-wool liberal Democrats, but their Democrat Party, which I was raised on those values, has nothing to do with what's going on in the Democrat Party today. The Democrat Party in those days stood for free speech and civil liberties, and was anti-communist and anti-fascist and anti-totalitarianism. Today, the Democrat Party has been taken over by what I would call left-wing fascists, and those people have also taken over most of the news media, are predominant throughout our corporations, throughout our government bureaucracies, and through, you know, they've taken over Hollywood, even sports. Who would have guessed? And they're characterized by what I consider a fanatical ideology that combines traditional socialism and a desire for expansion of government bureaucratic power and control of the economy, with a new bizarre quote unquote woke politically correct ideology that has to do with social and moral values, and that views anybody who disagrees with their radical philosophy as a white supremacist or racist, even if the issue has nothing to do with race. You know, if you oppose higher taxes, you're a racist. Well, I don't see what that has to do with race. But anybody who disagrees with them, they accuse of being a racist, and they use that as an excuse to shut you down, to get you fired from your job, to suppress your ideas so that you can't express them on social media or on the internet, to destroy your livelihood in any way possible. And you know, that's why I say it's a totalitarian movement, because it's totally opposed to free speech. They only allow their speech and not mine. I personally have been censored. My podcast was taken down, in effectively taken down. It's still up on the internet, but I wasn't able to promote it because Facebook shut it down. And you know, if you disagree with their totalitarian ideology, you're a racist, and therefore you don't deserve to be heard from, even though your ideas have nothing to do with race. Mm. That's the world we're living in right now, and I think it's extremely dangerous. Mm. It's extremely dangerous as it consolidates its power. People who speak out against it or fight it will probably find themselves being persecuted, not merely by people on the internet who are trying to silence you, but by agencies of the government that will be investigating you and trying to destroy you.
So Jim, if we go into the cause here, what's causing this, and why isn't there a strong enough counterbalancing influence to make sure it's not out of control?
Well, the counter, there is a counterforce. There is a counterforce. One institution that hasn't been taken over yet is the United States Supreme Court, but it wouldn't surprise me if this movement is to consolidate its power, this totalitarian movement. I don't know if I should even use the word leftist. Some people do, but I don't know if that's really appropriate. If they want to consolidate their power to the point where they can completely destroy any opposition, you'll know it's happening if they succeed in getting rid of the filibuster in the United States Senate.
Okay, explain what that is, the filibuster.
So there are 100 United States senators, and right now there are 50 Democrats and 50 Republicans. But the control of the Senate is in the balance. When there's a 50-50 vote, the vice president casts the tiebreaker, and so it'll become 51-50, and they can pass legislation. Now, there are some Republicans senators who tend to vote with the Democrats on many issues anyway. So the Democrats are really more or less in control of the Senate. However, Senate rules, in effect, for most important issues, require not a 51 vote majority, but a 60 vote majority because of the filibuster. And I won't go into the technical details about how that works, but just as a practical matter, if you want to get important legislation through, you need 60 votes. Well, the Democrats can't get 60 votes. But if they vote 51-50 to get rid of the filibuster, then they don't need 60 votes anymore. The filibuster is not in the Constitution. It's just a rule that they made up for themselves. So if they get rid of that filibuster rule, they don't need 60 votes more. Now they only need 51, and that they can get easily. And if they get 51 votes, if they get rid of the filibuster, one of the first things they're going to do is vote to, I'm pretty sure, because they've talked about it, will be to pack the Supreme Court. And that means instead of having 9 justices, they'll say, well, let's have 13 justices. They can do that. The Constitution doesn't limit the number of justices. So they have 13 justices. Well, that means they need to appoint 4 more. And those 4 more justices will be people who agree with them. And therefore, you'll then have a United States Supreme Court that's woke and socialist and left-wing, and will approve whatever agenda the new Democrat extremist party passes. So that's one thing that'll happen. And then pretty soon they'll be, maneuvering in ways that will bring in more Democratic senators. They'll make Washington, D.C. a state. They'll make Puerto Rico a state. They'll have 4 more Democrat senators. There'll be nothing to stop them. They'll have complete control of the government. And they'll have people who don't even believe in the Constitution, who don't believe in free speech, who will be ruling the Supreme Court. And therefore, people like me will not only not be able to get our message up online, we'll be arrested. That's what happens in totalitarian dictatorships. And that's the direction which I think we're headed. Now, there's other resistance. I mean, there's Fox News, there's talk radio. These are islands of conservative thought in an ocean of left-wing dogma.
Okay, so what's the from your message point of view? What does that look like? What would counteract that from
what would prevent that from happening?
Yeah.
Well, if they don't get rid of the filibuster.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the things the Democrats want to do, if they can get rid of the filibuster, is they want to nationalize our elections. Right now, under our constitutional system, the Constitution allows each state to manage elections. And for example, I happen to live in a state that has mail-in voting. But that's my state. That's, I live in Oregon. We have mail-in voting. We've had it for 30 years. It's terrible. But that's the decision our state made. If the Democrats get rid of the filibuster, they'll make that nationwide. They'll have mail-in voting. There'll be no identification. They'll get rid of identification requirements or signature requirements for mail-in ballots. And that will mean that there's no way to stop the ballots from being stuffed. And suddenly millions of illegals will be voting. They're very good. They're much better at the Republicans not because they're more, because the Republicans are so moral or righteous, but they're just not as good at Democrats as rigging elections and getting more votes to be counted in their favor. Partly because the public employees unions are Democrat, and they are the ones counting the votes. So this will happen, and that'll mean that we'll no longer have a 2-party country. We'll have a 1-party state. The Republican Party will be completely destroyed, and we'll have a 1-party state. And even if you're a Democrat, you may not. If you're an old-style Democrat, you may not think that's such a great idea, because we see how 1-party states operate in other countries, and it's pretty nasty. If you don't have competition of ideas and parties and political interests, and one party has complete control, that corrupts them. They become, and they're already corrupt, and they become more corrupt. And there's no way to resist their power.
Right. So what you're saying is obviously true, and it's happening. It's evolving in its own way, mysterious way. What I'm also feeling is that nature never allows anything to get too extreme. And if it does, then there's some counteracting force that rises up to balance whatever extremism is going on. Because ultimately, any leader has to serve the interests of the whole, not just the interests of 51% or whatever they want to influence. And so I think there's the influence of what's going on between individuals and parties and stuff like that. But then I think there's another element, which we talk about in our book, that protects the interests of everybody. And that's greater than any leader. It's a collective consciousness where, things will ultimately, I think, be balanced. If it gets to, there's a chance that it could get to very extreme, and then that extremity has to collapse because it's just not sustainable, because no one can live on it. And we've seen that in other leadership systems in the world, right? When they get too extreme to one point, then just something happens where there's retaliation, and the pendulum is swung back the other way. So I see That's why I believe we're ultimately all protected, but it's kind of going to be uncomfortable, going through what we have to go through, to establish a new normal, a new balanced reality.
Well, uncomfortable is a fairly mild word, Ramon, for some of the events we've seen in history.
Yeah.
The people of North Korea are rather uncomfortable.
Yeah.
If they don't have enough food to eat, and if they say something critical of the dear leader, their families will be tortured. So that's quite uncomfortable. And
They're very uncomfortable.
And the Nazi regime led to 100 million deaths in World War II. That was also very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So you're right. After the 12 years, the Nazis were destroyed. The whole nation of Germany was destroyed, and a new order was restored, and eventually Germany became a prosperous and very successful democracy.
Yeah.
The Soviet Union lasted for 75 years, and that was also extremely uncomfortable. Totalitarian system, tens of millions of people were killed in, in gulags, whatever, sent to Siberia. So
it's like you're saying, how long do we want to put up with that?
Yeah. So that that imbalance. It's true that eventually something counterbalances it, comes to counterbalance it.
But why should we have to go to that extreme and go through all that suffering? And what I'm hearing now is your message is that, well, let's avert going there in the first place.
Well, I have long since, as egomaniacal as I am, I've long since given up the notion that I can have any influence over events. I see myself as an observer, and I purchased a house in a foreign country a couple of months ago because I saw this coming, and I started looking actually early last summer, and finally found and consummated a purchase in December. So I got one foot out the door.
Yeah.
When the shit hits the fan, well, it's already hitting the fan, but when it gets bad enough, I ain't going to be here. And good luck to you and everybody else who stays here. This is bizarre what's happening.
I'm a New Zealand citizen, by the way. So
you can go back anytime.
I've always had one foot out the door. I've just had one foot in the door.
Yeah, you're very fortunate. Now, I don't want to be lined up at the airports along with 28 million other people trying to get out. Like maybe you see films from Nazi Germany in 1937 with people trying to get out before the Holocaust actually gets into full swing. Right. I don't want to be in that group. I'd rather be in the group that already left. But I see right now something I never would have expected. I met a woman recently from Eastern Oregon who told me that people, now that's, Oregon is a very left-wing state, but the eastern part of the state is rural and very conservative. She said people are meeting secretly, forming armed militia groups. Now, and I have neighbors of mine, I won't say neighbors, let's say people who I know in the area, who in this area, even in the Portland metropolitan area, who are talking about forming armed militia groups, and not to take any political power, just to protect themselves from what they see happening around us.
Yeah,
that's pretty crazy. Yeah. And I'm not saying, when I say it's crazy, I don't mean they're wrong. Yeah. I mean, I was talking to some guys about this, and well, should we form a mutual protection group? And I had this realization that if I form a group if I get together with a group like that, and I got, 6 or 8 Antifa wackos outside my house screaming and threatening to take over my property, and we've seen things like that happen. We've seen videos of it on TV where Antifa, Black Lives Matter wackos are doing that kind of stuff. I know I could call these guys, and if I form a group like that, I could call these guys, and they'd all show up my house with shotguns and chase these idiots away, right? But what if I call them and I say, well, they're not actually Antifa, they're actually FBI agents. Do you think any of my buddies would show up? I don't think so. You know, they may be great guys, very loyal, but I don't think they're going to show up for that. So, you know, if that's where it's coming from, I don't know that.
But obviously, the FBI is only going to show up with there's law breaking, right? So there's an implication. Well, are you saying the law is going to be biased in some way, or?
Well, I think it already is. I mean, look, I'll tell you, you know, this for people who don't know, who haven't been following this, what I'm saying is probably sounds cuckoo, okay? But I tell you what, there was a cabal of people who were deeply embedded in the United States government, including the head of the FBI, the head of the CIA, who 4 or 5 years ago essentially created a conspiracy to take down a duly elected president of the United States. The whole Russia collusion investigation. Anybody who followed it, the whole left-wing media was treating it like it's very serious. Donald Trump was colluding with Putin and with Russia, and when they investigated it, they came up with nothing. They came up with no proof that anything like that occurred. And in fact, what came out and was widely suppressed in the what I don't even call it mainstream media, just the Democrat media, was that the actual conspiracy was among these top level government officials appointed by Obama to take down Trump, initially keep him from becoming president, and then after he became president, to take him down, and with false allegations. And it was a conspiracy. Now, those same people now, you know, John Brennan. You know who John Brennan is? John Brennan was the let me see. He was the director of the CIA. Very powerful person at the top of you know, America's intelligence community, right? John Brennan is now saying, direct quote. Let me find this. Okay, John Brennan said on TV on January 21st. This was reported by Reuters and elsewhere, but I saw the video of it myself, and this is a direct quote. He said, members of the Biden team are now moving in laser-like fashion to uncover as much as they can about what looks similar to insurgency movements that we see overseas. And it brings together an unholy alliance, frequently of religious extremists, authoritarians, fascists, bigots, racists, nativists, even libertarians. Okay, he's talking about domestic insurgency. He's saying that they're domestic terrorists, and that the Biden administration is moving with laser-like, what is it? Moving in laser-like fashion to uncover this domestic insurgency movement. Now, what is he talking about? Do you know who he's talking about, Ramon?
No.
He's talking about me. But not me, really. I mean, I'm not a Trump. By the way, I'm not a Trumpanista. I told you this last time. I'm not a Trumpanista.
Yeah.
But they're going after anybody who supported Donald Trump. Why? Because they think they're all racist, bigots, white supremacists, whatever is on their list of evil. They think that they think that Trump is a white supremacist and a racist, and that anybody who voted for him is a white supremacist and racist. And they're already destroying, you know, trying to destroy their livelihood, getting people who they perceive to be in this movement removed from airwaves. if they're on TV or radio, they're trying to get them shut down. They're trying to get Fox News shut down, thrown off of cable TV. But beyond that, and former FBI Director James Comey says that the Republican Party needs to be burned to the ground. And I could go on and on. The Director of Homeland Security has said similar things. And there's another fellow who said something very similar. Joe Biden, in his inauguration speech, said that we have to uncover these racist groups and confront them and take them down. Joe Biden said that.
Yeah.
You're hearing this message consistently from the leadership of the Democratic Party, and they've started acting on it. They're actually acting on it. The Department of Defense has announced that they're purging these what they call extremists from the military. Why are they doing that?
Yeah.
Why do you suppose they have 6,000 National Guard troops stationed now permanently? It looks like permanently. They said they were just going to be there for the inauguration, and then for the the January 6th thing, and then the inauguration. But now they're there permanently. What are they doing there? What are National Guard troops doing stationed in Washington, D.C.? This is right out of typical fascist governments behave this way, stationing National Guard troops.
Yeah, I mean, it's a duality perspective. They're both sides can be creating false enemies in their mind when it's really about everyone connecting and finding that common ground. Because I don't think everyone disagrees absolutely. There's always things we can always agree on, and if a leader is going to create duality in the population and bias against one group and in favor of another group, then it's ultimately going to create more. They're just enlivening that. So that's why somehow we have to go beyond this duality and ultimately realize it's not red, it's not blue, it's somewhere in the middle that we're all in this together. And
do you think that's going to be happening anytime soon in this country?
I don't know. It's going to go through a metamorphosis in its own way, and it's unfathomable, really, what's going to happen. But it's still like this is a capitalistic society for the most part, and this country's growing up on that, the opportunity and the freedom to create what you want. I think that's always going to be there, and I think that's actually more powerful than what's going on a political level. Or even a lawmaking level. This country, inherent in this country, is people will create their realities regardless of what political power is governing this country. So, and I think that's the most powerful force.
My phone is finally freed up. I've been on hold with EGG and some other people like Maddie. And sorry,
I've got my answering machine is giving a message in the background here, so that's over now.
There we go.
Okay, so I'm sure you're aware that opinion polls have shown that a majority of younger people, I think maybe the cutoff is about age 45 or 50, the majority of them think socialism is a good thing. So there's a generational divide ideologically. And socialism has, I got to turn this off.
Everybody wants to say on this podcast, Jim.
Yeah. So socialism has gained a strong foothold in the younger generation. It's not very popular among folks my age, but that's the change in consciousness. When I was going to school, we were taught American history. We were taught to respect the Constitution and the founding fathers and our founding principles and individual liberty. That's not taught anymore. Now the young people are being indoctrinated in Green New Deals and socialism and in critical race theory, which basically teaches that all white people are guilty of racism, whether consciously or unconsciously. and that the white race has oppressed all other races throughout history, and that in order to achieve justice, that will have to be corrected. Now, when that time comes, Raamon, I think, and when I say when it comes, it's already here, but the people who are, white people who are of a more conservative philosophy will be the first ones rounded up. And then the white heterosexual men who are of a more left-wing disposition, who believe in this, are sympathetic to critical race theory and woke politically correct ideology, they'll be the last ones put in the re-education camps. And they may think that they'll be protected by saying how much they sympathize with Black Lives Matter, but I have a hunch that in the end that won't protect them. That if they're white, they'll be deemed to be guilty of oppression.
Yeah, I mean it's obviously a possibility. I don't think it'll go that far, because I just think there's too much common sense that will prevail ultimately, and I think it's just a matter of going through whatever processes have to go through, because the end of last year, to me, being from New Zealand, which is quite an integrated country in terms of both the entrepreneurial capitalist side of things, and socialism in terms of like providing of the basics like healthcare and education. Obviously, if you want better healthcare and education, you go with private sources and you get that, but those basics are there for the New Zealand population. So there's a coexistence of these two realities existing quite harmoniously. Now, I don't know if it will get, thrown out of balance or anything like that based on what's been going on with COVID and all that. But I think ultimately there's always going to be a balance that we're going to come back to, and I think I think the consciousness is too high for anyone to be persecuted.
But they already are being.
But in what way?
Well, there are thousands of people who have been fired from their jobs for daring to express any conservative ideas or support for Trump.
Let's go into that.
No, I won't. And by the way, let me make clear, I don't think Donald Trump is an actual conservative. And by the way, I don't think I'm a conservative. And I'm also not a Trumpanista. But I see what's happening to people who express traditional conservative ideas, and I see what happens to people who are supporting Donald Trump, who I didn't vote for in 2016. I voted for him in 2020, not because I love Donald Trump, but because I fear the Democrats. But anybody who's been part of that, if they dare to express these opinions online, they're treated as, oh, these people are racist. They don't deserve to have a job. They don't deserve to have a livelihood, and they're silenced. And I, as I tell you, I was also silenced by Facebook. And I've seen a lot of other people who've been silenced by Facebook or Google or Twitter, and that's how these people work. They if you don't agree with them, you don't have a right to speak. They shut you down. And
so let's go into that. Let's go into the conservative ideology and flesh that out so people can understand it is not a threat, because if they're doing these shutdowns out of fear that it's actually not real, there's nothing to fear from that ideology. Well, then let's make it clear, what is that ideology, that conservative reality that should be respected in its own right?
Well, it's very hard to answer that anymore, because
answer it from your perspective, because
I can talk about my own ideas.
Yeah.
But I have a problem with conservatism because it doesn't mean what it used to mean. Liberalism doesn't mean what it used to mean, and our whole vocabulary is breaking down in an Orwellian way.
That's great, because then a new, maybe more life-supporting ideology can emerge, and maybe that's what you're bringing out. It's not conservative, it's not socialism, but it's this. So maybe that's what you're bringing out, is this new ideology that's fresh and relevant.
Well, that may happen at some point. Now, look, I don't pretend to know the future. I see possible scenarios. And you may be right. It may not go as far as I fear that it could. But I know the people who are on the Republican / conservative / Trump side of the great ideological divide are scared. I don't think people on the left are scared. Maybe they are. But I think if they are, they're scared of phantoms.
Yeah.
But the people on the conservative side are scared that the Democrats in power are using the power to destroy them. Now, I'll tell you when you need to be scared enough that it's time to get out.
Mm-hmm.
First, if they get rid of the filibuster, as I talked about, that becomes a major roadblock to their complete totalitarian takeover that is then gone. But if that happens, I think you should expect to see certain hosts on Fox News may suddenly not be there anymore, and you may not know why. And certain talk radio hosts may suddenly not be there anymore. Maybe they'll be mysteriously accused of crimes or involved in scandals, or maybe they just disappear in the dark of night and we don't know what happened to them. Mm-hmm. And when you see that those voices are being silenced, the remaining islands of resistance to the current predominant ideology, when those islands of resistance are gone, you don't see them there anymore for whatever reason. To me, that means it's time to buy your tickets and get out. It's like, if they shut down the sources of ideas and the sources of information, then the resistance is there's no more resistance. It's gone.
Yeah. So
if that happens, then I'd say, okay, well that proves that my worst case scenario is happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And many of the Democrats are now talking about trying to destroy Fox News, first through boycotts and getting threatening advertisers who advertise, especially on specific shows like Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity, that we're going to boycott your products, so you better stop advertising on those shows. They want to put enough financial pressure on Fox News that way to have those hosts removed. Mm. So that's kind of a soft pressure. That's not the same as rounding people up and putting them in prison. But there's also talk from Democrats and from Democrat media, which is like CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times and other so-called mainstream media. They're saying that Fox News shouldn't be carried on cable networks any longer, that the cable networks should stop carrying it. So they're basically trying to destroy not only their business competitor, but the main source of opposition information and ideas, to shut it down. And so that's like moving in that direction, because when totalitarians take power, the first thing they have to do is make sure that there's no intellectual opposition. They can't have opposing ideas being presented or any criticism of what they're doing. That has to be silenced. The next step is to make sure that their opponents are not armed. The first thing Hitler would do when he came into and took over a country would be round up all the guns so that there can be no armed resistance.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, if there's a destruction going on of something that is not life supporting, or actually is life supporting, if there's destruction of something that is life supporting, then ultimately that'll ricochet, and that the destroyer will be destroyed.
Absolutely.
So anybody trying to destroy anyone is always going to backfire. So I think that's built into the system. you know, because we all have the right to live in freedom in this world, and especially in a country that's made its trademark freedom. That, you know, I don't think the laws of this land, let's say the laws of nature of this land, will allow that sort of suppression to go to an extreme, you know, and there will be, because everybody has a piece of the truth, you know, and we're all contributing to the evolution of truth. So if the truth on one side and truth on the other side, you know, if any of them are out of balance with what's evolutionary, what's supportive of the next phase of how we should be living and leading, then it'll just fall off. It'll just fall off because there's knowledge is always evolving and morphing and from one thing to another.
Yeah, I think ultimately that may very well be true. But, you know, look, Hitler committed suicide in a bunker, you know, as his empire was being destroyed around him. Stalin had some kind of a heart attack or something, and the people around him wouldn't get him a doctor because they wanted him to die. Mm. So, you know, yes, the great dictators may ultimately have horrible ends.
Yeah.
And, you know, it may come back on them. But you know, this was after each of them had basically murdered tens of millions of people. Mm. So it can take a while. And before nature, nature reorders and rights itself. Yes, but you know, but we're not going in that positive direction now. Right now, we're going in a very destructive and dangerous direction.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think we're in a different quality of time where, you know, information is more readily available and to everybody in whatever shape or form it comes through, whatever avenue you find that. And we're in another level of consciousness where I think whatever we do now will show up more quickly than it will in the past. You know, whatever truth has been suppressed will nowadays come out far more quickly and unravel, you know?
Well, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if we're there yet, Raamon. I mean, I know what you're talking about, and I don't know if we want to be explicit about it or not. But
well, it's got to be hard.
You know, I think we have to be explicit at this point. Mm. I think you're talking about what we know as the Maharishi effect, which is that if a large enough portion of a population practices transcendental meditation and experiences that deep silence of consciousness within themselves every day, it reduces the stress of those individuals, and that reduction of stress affects the entire society.
Yeah.
And, you know, without getting into the details, that, you know, groups doing the transcendental meditation and advanced aspects of that program together can have that effect. And astonishing as it sounds, there has been scientific research that has documented that this actually works. Yep. Yes, you're right. We can reduce societal stress and raise the consciousness of society, and then negativity will be dissolved, and the society itself becomes more evolved. The problem we have is that we don't have the numbers. You have it's a mathematical formula, and there are not enough people doing that to reach that reach that result.
But
so I don't see that happening anytime soon. I certainly hope it happens at some point. But in the meantime, you know, buy gold and guns and keep your head right and keep your head down, and hopefully you can get through this.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great point. It's like, how much do we actually really value living in a peaceful, coherent world, right? And if we can get support, like one of my initiatives this year is to inspire, it's like 21 for permanent peace in 2021, which means if we can get 21 companies to give a very small amount of their money relative to what they make, let's say $1 million, 21 companies give $1 million each, $21 million, that can be utilized to engage peace-creating monks, specifically trained to create this field effect, this Maharishi effect. So if companies can just wake up, you know, to that fact that there is a technology, a practical, scientifically proven technology to create an effect in the consciousness that neutralizes, as you say, negativity and divisiveness and all that, then we can do it very quickly.
Yeah.
But we have to get this message to the right people and say, hey, do you want to be in a world where you're always fighting the other person and having a conflict of views? Or do you want to be in a world where you can actually happily coexist without feeling negativity, and you actually respect the other person's point of view and they respect your point of view, because the consciousness allows that to happen. But right now, there's a fighting consciousness that in some ways childish, because nobody can really appreciate differences.
Yeah, it's very severe now, and sure, you're right, that can happen, and I as Woody Allen said, political solutions don't work, and
Yep.
a spiritual solution like that can be very powerful, and it could work. In the meantime, we have to deal with the world as it is, and I will tell you this, Raamon, there will be people watching this video who are woke, left-wing, progressive, whatever term you want to use, who will look at me and say, this guy's a racist. He's a racist. He's a white supremacist. He benefits from white privilege. They will say that. And I would say to you, Raamon, have I said anything that's remotely racist?
No.
Have I said anything denigrating people of a different race from my own?
Well,
no, but that doesn't matter, you see, because I don't agree with them, so I must be a racist and therefore evil, and to be destroyed. That's how these people will react to what they hear.
Yeah. And in some ways you're feeling discriminated against, when you have not projected that discrimination to the other side, and so it's like a reverse, what do you call it, a reverse racism, that you're maybe feeling and fearing, and that has to go. That neither side should be like accusing the other side.
The whole thing is insane. I'll tell you, the first time I saw it close up and personal was about, I think it was 8 or 9 years ago. I was making a video I was trying to get my movie made, the Tax Man Cometh, and we did like I made a 10-minute promotional video with a group of people.
Yeah, that's right.
And while we were filming this, there was a fellow who was one of the actors, and he accused me of being a racist. And I said, "What? Why am I a racist?" The reason he thought I was a racist was because I quoted Martin Luther King. I quoted Martin Luther King, and he thought that was racist. And I thought, why? Why is that racist?
Well, what was his?
And he said, "Well, I'm the only black person here, so it must be directed against me." And I said, I said, "Well, I didn't even know you were black." His skin color wasn't that dark. I thought he might be Hispanic.
Yeah.
But that didn't matter. That didn't matter. I quoted Martin Luther King, and therefore I was a racist. And it was like, well, I don't get that. Well, I guess if you're white and you quote Martin Luther King, you must be racist. This is the kind of insanity which now passes for normal thought process.
Yeah.
Among half the country.
And that's why
it's taking over every. I sent my daughter. I have a 14-year-old daughter. I sent her to a Catholic school. Her mother's Catholic, a great Catholic school, traditional moral values, classical education, a very good Catholic high school. And then after just as the school year was starting, they sent out this thing because there were all these riots going on in Portland and all around the country, and riots for, they called it social justice. And they were saying, and Black Lives Matter. And I thought, what the heck? This is a traditional Catholic school putting this out. They sent it out to all the parents and the students. And then I found out that they had a director of inclusion and diversity. And she started setting up these groups, which basically try to indoctrinate the parents in critical race theory. And I tried going to the meetings, and I discovered I couldn't get a word in. It was all online, of course. If I'd been able to go to a physical meeting, maybe they wouldn't have been able to shut me up. I couldn't get a word in. It was just all indoctrination, all coming one way. And I finally figured out, well, I thought, why are they indoctrinating the parents? I thought they're trying to educate the kids. I finally figured out they're indoctrinating the parents so that when they start indoctrinating the kids, the parents won't object. Why else would they be doing it? And so I said, well, this is taken over everywhere. Everywhere I go, I see this new ideology. The Biden administration has announced that they are that every branch of government, every branch of the bureaucracy, including the military, is now being trained to root out racism and white supremacy, which these people imagine is so prevalent throughout our society that it poses a serious threat, and therefore they're indoctrinating everybody who works for the government in critical race theory, and they're purging people out of the military who are conservative, who don't buy into this. And you ask yourself, well, why are they doing that? I mean, if the military goes to war against China or Iran, does it really matter what their political ideology is? I don't think so. So why does it matter? It matters because they're not going after China or Iran. They're going after us. They're getting them ready so that when it's time to march people like me off to re-education camps, the military will obey. I can't see any other reason for it. Why else would they be purging conservative people with conservative thought out of the military and at the same time indoctrinating them with this new extremist racial ideology? Why else would they do it?
Because it's inner stress and fear and not being able to discern reality properly. You know, it's like people have to identify their stresses, identify objectively with something, thinking that's real when it's just the projection of their own stress inside of themselves. And this is why one of the first things that we advocate in our Science of Protection book is we have to purify what doesn't need to be there so we can actually be coherent and actually see what's clear there, so we can actually be in a leadership state and we have the capacity to handle whatever situation we're in. We take the spontaneous right action and we deserve good things in life. And this is where this inner development is more important than all these other managing the differences on the surface. That's what's going on. We're trying to manage differences on the surface instead of getting into that space where you just see the differences, but you're not overshadowed by them because you know underlying that is a sense of commonality and humanity and unity.
Well, you're very positive, and you are solution oriented, and that's great. And you know, I've been beating that bush for a long time myself. I became a TM teacher in 1971, and I totally understand that approach and think it's ultimately correct. But you know, in the meantime, while I'm waiting for the Age of Enlightenment, which I thought was supposed to be here,
you're still holding out
ago, and while I'm waiting for it, you know, I'm buying ammunition.
Yeah, exactly. You gotta protect yourself. I mean, the first line of defense is, you know, let's develop our awareness. Second line of defense is let's try and communicate about these differences so we don't get caught up in them and, you know, confuse each other, you know, as being bad or negative. And third line as well, if you can't talk about it and if you can't, you know, have good awareness about what's required, then, you know, you have to be prepared to protect yourself. So, you know, I respect all levels of protection. They're appropriate at different periods of time, depending on where the leadership evolution is at, you know.
Let me ask you a difficult question.
Sure.
You have an ideology which has now taken over half the country, and including the Democrat Party, which is in power, that includes such odd ideas as the notion that that boys who want to play in girls' sports should be allowed to do so. But not only that, those boys should be allowed to go into girls' locker rooms and girls' restrooms. And now I'm just taking the most extreme aspects of their ideology.
That's a new one.
But but even more now that's pretty bizarro. But even worse is that they believe that if a 9-year-old boy says that he thinks he's a girl, you know, if that happened in the past, you would have said, okay, the kid's going through a weird phase, he'll get out of it, he'll be fine. But now that they believe that you should take that 9-year-old boy, and everybody should start treating him as a girl, give him a girl's name, start letting him wear girls' clothes, and start giving him hormone treatments that will block him from achieving ordinary male puberty, start giving him female hormones. And when he gets a little older, when he's still a teenager, we'll have surgery to remove his genitals so that he can now be, his body can be sculpted to look like a girl's body. Now, and they'll say he's a girl. I say, no, he's a boy who's been sculpted to look like a girl.
Is this law?
This is now their idea of normal. Now, you tell me something, Raamon. Is that like okay? Is that in harmony with natural law? Is that something we should okay?
That's messing with nature. I mean, every like you say, everything starts from a seed. We all started from seed form, and we all expanded and unfolded, who we are, and we go through different phases. And I mean, it's not until really, into your 25 or older where you've actually fully matured physically, and I don't think anyone should be interfering with that process until you allow that full seed to bloom into a full adult. So yeah, I mean, if that becomes law, that's just idiotic, and eventually nature will take care of that.
But that is law. Not if it becomes, that is the law.
Yeah, well, that law.
The family of that, the parents of that child can legally take him to a doctor and have the doctor start administering female hormones to him to help facilitate his transition into his femalehood.
Yeah.
Now his DNA will still be male because they haven't figured out how to change that.
Yeah, but
that's the law. Now they also, I'll tell you something else that's the law that to me is so barbaric and outrageous, it's unimaginable. In some states, Muslims within the United States practice female genital mutilation. Now, when we first heard about this practice years ago, it was happening in foreign countries, and we were outraged by it and thought, well, this is barbaric, it's horrible. That they actually will take a little girl and they will cut off part of her genitals, specifically her clitoris, so that through the rest of her life she's sexually crippled and incapable of enjoying sex. And we thought, well, okay, this is happening in other countries. And you would have expected feminists to be the loudest, screaming the loudest about how horrible this is. Well, now it happens inside the United States. We know specifically of cases in Michigan where there's a large. Pardon me?
That's a criminal offense, though, isn't it?
Well, it should be. It's in the state of Michigan where there's a large Muslim population. They there was let's see, they had a group of people who were being criminally prosecuted under the federal code. In federal court, they were being criminally prosecuted, a ring of people who were engaged in female genital mutilation. And they were criminally prosecuted in federal court. And the judge said, well, you can't prosecute this in federal court because it's unconstitutional for the federal government to prohibit this practice. This is he suddenly discovered the 10th Amendment, which delegates powers leaves powers not delegated to the federal government to the state government. And there was a federal statute that outlawed female genital mutilation, and that's how the federal statute they were prosecuted under. Well, the federal court judge said, no, that federal statute is unconstitutional. This is a state matter, and he threw the case out. Now, under Michigan law, there is a crime called, well, let's see, the traditional term for it is mayhem, which means cutting off another person's body, part of another person's body. And I think they call it aggravated assault under Michigan law. But Michigan authorities declined to prosecute. Why? Well, because it's not politically correct to go after Muslims. And I guess they're a powerful force politically in the state of Michigan.
Yeah.
But the feminists, totally silent, not a word about it. Well, why not? Well, they can't criticize Muslims.
Yeah.
So you know, this is the world we're living in, where extremism has become mainstreamed, and people who express values that have been predominant for thousands of years, traditional values that have been predominant in our society for thousands of years, are now called names and it's called hate speech. If you oppose homosexuality, which our society, which virtually every culture in the world has opposed since time, you know, since humans came out of the caves. If you do that, if you say now that you're opposed to homosexuality, they call you a homophobe and a racist and a bigot, and they try to destroy you.
Yeah.
So, you know, and so, you know, this is the world we're living in, where what used to be considered normal is now considered pathological, and what was used to be considered pathological is now considered normal. Everything's kind of upside down.
Yeah, I mean, it's diversity is extreme, right? There's extreme diversity in this world, and people trying to get their head around it. It's too much, you know. And there's a lot of mistake of intellect that can come up in that process, and that's why we have to develop more consciousness, more coherence in the minds of people, so that they can naturally discern, okay, yeah, this is probably the best way to go, and probably stay away from that, you know. I mean, a lot of people think they're making the right decision, but then ultimately in the long term, it'll turn out that, well, maybe that's not the best thing, you know.
So yeah, that if people's level of consciousness is higher, their decisions will be more in harmony with natural law.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the only way. That's the only way, you know. Otherwise, we're just fighting differences on the surface, and it just creates more conflict, you know, which never resolves anything.
But you know, it's interesting that you know, Maharishi talks extensively about natural law and living in harmony with natural law. The Declaration of Independence spoke about nature's God and nature's law, and you know, the rights to which nature's God entitled them.
Yep.
And so it was also based on that concept of natural law.
Yeah.
The entire philosophy of American civilization, the foundation of American civilization, was based on that concept that there is natural law and that it comes from God, and that we wanted to build a society based on that principle, because and the basis of it is natural law entitles us to certain rights as human beings, right? Not to be oppressed, a right to freedom. You know, the famous phrase, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, includes the right to own property, right to self-defense, and the other rights that are embodied in the Bill of Rights. And all of that comes from that concept of natural law and rights that are granted to us by God. And that's what's being destroyed now.
Yeah, it's being destroyed because people are so smart and intelligent that they think they know better than natural law and the Constitution, and they're not living it from actually experiencing it.
And Raamon, you when you use being such a kind-hearted person as you are, when you use the expression that they're so intelligent, what you actually mean is that they're so ignorant, I think.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and they're quote unquote intelligent.
Yeah, ironic. You're using the phrase ironic.
They have a small amount of knowledge that's partial knowledge that's disconnected from the totality of wisdom and intelligence, which is, you know, nature's intelligence itself. And so I think as soon as, you know, when we think we're playing God and we are, you know, we're smarter than nature, then I think we're in big trouble there. That's where I get a lot of fear, you know.
No, I don't think I'm smarter than God. You know, I'd say maybe equal. No, I'm just kidding.
We're getting there. We're getting on the same plane.
Rush Limbaugh, who, as you know, just died today.
Oh, he did. Oh, wow.
Yeah, or maybe it was yesterday. But Rush Limbaugh always said, you know, this is Rush Limbaugh with talent on loan from God. And when I would introduce my show, I would say, this is Jim Greenfield with talent not on loan from God. It's a gift.
Yeah. Nice. Nice. Well, Jim, I think on that note, let's wrap up this evolution of leadership. I think we've covered a lot of ground. Thank you so much for your time and your perspective.
You know, I just realized I forgot to ask you the one question I wanted to ask you, but
Okay.
but
No, shoot.
I'll cover the question is you don't have to answer it because it's time to go. But
Do it. We can do a PS. I can give you a one word or a one sentence answer. No problem.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about, from the standpoint of leadership, how is it that it comes about that the quality of leadership deteriorates so much at sometimes in history that you end up with these kind of awful, destructive movements that end up destroying people's lives, taking their freedom, and killing them?
It's a cycle. It's a cycle. There's always a creative cycle, a maintaining cycle, and then there's a destructive cycle. So I think it plays its role in some ways to help us discern what is evolutionary and what is not evolutionary when it comes to leadership, so that we can be more firm in what does really help us expand happiness and freedom.
Okay. Well, that's a good positive way to end.
Positive spin. Awesome, Jim. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Raamon.